just so grateful to be in this space with you. Thankful for the technology that allows us to do this, and I'm thankful for the friendships that are strengthened and the new ones that are formed just by getting together for an important conversation like this. In the CCI world of Campfire Conversations, we choose topics that we feel are important in God's global church, and specifically here about Christian camping, the impact and the method of that temporary community and the power of how God works through that has space for all kinds of opportunities beyond the fun and the relational connections to really make a difference in this world. We know that leaders are shaped and developed through camp experiences. They may be 8 years old or 12 years old or 50 years old, and they're being called into a lifetime of leadership. And when it comes to the heart of God, peace and unity, yeah, that's what's his original intention. And so it's really important that we talk about this, and that camp does have a role in this. I'm grateful to introduce you to Jon Huckins. If you don't already know Jon, you've seen in the descriptions before that Jon has been a neighborhood pastor and lived and worked and studied in the Christian justice world for most of his adult life. In 2011, he co-founded Global Immersion, a peacemaking training organization, and is now the founder of Journey Home. And he's an adjunct professor of New Testament at Point Loma Nazarene University in California, USA. Jon is an author and a frontline practitioner in global peacemaking. And we met at camp. We served together on staff to summer camp. And so Jon is a ministry leader who knows how God works through camp, understands the power of the unity in our faith and ministry collaboration worldwide. Just a great friend, good man, and grateful to have him here and hear his perspective to guide us in a conversation about mending the divides, practical tools for camp's role in global peacemaking. So, Jon, I'm just going to turn it over to you, and you kick us off in this conversation, and we're here to listen, learn, and engage in the conversation. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, my friend. Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it. And Danny Wallen coming in too. My goodness. He's not real good at holding his camera on the golf course, but I appreciate his efforts. And good to see the rest of you from around the world. What a treat, and what a microcosm of what God's community can look like when we're linked in this way. And so I'm thrilled to be here. My hope for this time is to invite us into some theology, but we won't go in too deep in the weeds around peace and peacemaking, and then some practices, some tools, because I think as we come into rooms like this, as we experience the realities in our world, it's probably not super hard for us to come up or to be able to describe some of the feelings of conflict or injustice or pain or divide, not only on a global level, but in our own lives, in our relationships, and maybe within our teams, at our camp, in our organization, in our churches. And the work of being a peacemaker isn't one that's just reserved to international peace treaties. It's actually one I will argue that is one for all of us as followers of Jesus, as one who lived as a peacemaker and modeled what that invitation looked like for the rest of us. And so hopefully this can be as constructive and tangible, and I'll share some stories, but we'll also love to just interact. Be prepared for me to ask some questions of you all to say, hey, what is it that's on your mind as you come into a space like this in regards to the conflicts you may be navigating in your context, and how can this conversation inform a helpful and healing way forward. I do have some PowerPoint Vicky has, and it's very basic, but when we talk about this work, if you will, or way of life of peace and peacemaking, which I've had the delight and the challenge to be involved in for almost 2 decades in a formal level, I start with my family because they are in it um, with me in every step of the way. In fact, we intentionally choose to move into the neighborhood we're in 15 years ago, and for us, it was a choice as a family to say, how are we going to follow Jesus together in community with others, and how are we going to actually try to live what we talk about as best we can. And you see my wife Jan there, and 4 kids, 14, 12, and twins that are 9, almost 10. And it's a regular part of our conversation each morning around the breakfast table to hear from each other. What are you working through at school right now? What's it look like to be a peacemaker at school today? What are the challenges you're feeling, and how can we talk about that together? Um, I'll never forget the the first time I was really thrown in the gauntlet with this crew in regards to peacemaking. My oldest, Ruby, was in preschool, so this was at least 10 years ago, and it was career day, and she invited me to come and share about peacemaking because she's so proud of this work that I do in peacemaking. Um, and and so I say, okay, sure, yeah, I'll go to career day and talk about peacemaking. And so all the kids are there. They have the other parents that are going to present on their careers. Um, and of course, I go right after the chef and the policeman, like the most clear, concise jobs ever. And then Ruby comes up, and she says, "Here's my dad, and he's a peacemaker." And they all yell in unison, "He's a pizza maker." And I knew from that moment forward, the rest of the presentation was just going to be an uphill battle. Um, and do the whole, like, you had some kids come on stage, and we enacted what it could look like to be a peacemaker. This kid's feeling left out, and we were trying to go over and talk to him and talk about the Good Samaritan a little bit here and there. And I'm thinking, I think I did it. I think I taught these kids what a peacemaker is. And they all file out. And as I'm walking out the room, this little bro comes up and whispers in my ear, "I like pepperoni." Clearly revealing that I had failed in teaching what peacemaking is. Um, but the part of the beauty of that is, one, um, the work of peacemaking can be very misunderstood, and two, for me and for us, this is something we're trying to flesh out in the context of our everyday life as best we can. And it's a shared journey. So that's the crew that sends me. A couple real brief pieces about the organization that I lead now. I was able to study formally the work of just peacemaking at Fuller Seminary as part of my master's degree with Glenn Stassen, which was a treat, and was very involved in Palestine and Israel, and here domestically around different social issues, but live here at the border, near the 13 minutes from the border of US and Mexico. And so this context is the one within which I share and teach, and our neighborhood is a melting pot of the world in many ways too. And so it's been a challenge and a gift to speak from that place. Journey Home, our Journey Home's the name of the organization that I lead. Its work is to heal soul and society through the spiritual practice of pilgrimage. If there's anything we've discovered, that the way of Jesus isn't something we just talk about, but it's actually something that we embody in our heads and our hearts and our feet. And pilgrimage is this ancient spiritual practice that allows us to get close, to move toward, to get proximate. And the way we do that is to get close to conflicts. Specifically, this region here on the borderlands, in our border, we have a border pilgrimage that we host for people to come and see and experience the human stories beyond all the kind of political rhetoric around borders and walls and all those things. And then we have another pilgrimage on the Camino to Santiago, which is primarily for church leaders who are trying to get close to the pain and the conflicts within themselves. And when we do that healing work, we can lead in more helpful and whole ways. And so that's the work that we do, trusting that pilgrimage is ultimately not about a destination arriving somewhere, but about the transformation that happens along the way. This posture of, we're all here to learn, we're to be curious and to grow. The life of discipleship is one of constant growth and development. Vic, you can actually slide through the next slide, because that's a bit about what I just shared. But I want to zero in, and before asking you all a question, on just a moment to name this moment we're facing. I mean, I cannot speak for all of us at all. I can only speak for myself because, especially with the global community like I'm looking at here, you all have different conflicts you're facing, maybe different pain. It could be a socio-political thing, it could be a relational dynamic, but my experience has been that when I'm talking and teaching about this in various places, most people, when we hear about the word peace or peacemaking, they don't have an actual vision for what that looks like. And it's been largely something that's just talked about on an international level, or something we talked about in the 1960s, or with Volkswagen bus and kind of fairy tales and unicorns. And we want to ground this peace and peacemaking as a practice, as a subversive way of Jesus, and an invitation to how we show up in our life and relationships. In this moment of political polarization in the United States specifically, we deal so much with an absence of proximity to one another, specifically those who think differently than us around politics or theology or ideology. And for us, we really want to invite people to get close, to break through some of the stigma and stereotypes that separate us from one another, and try to learn and to grow in the midst of difference. We actually don't see difference as a problem to fix, but an opportunity for transformation and for growth. I'll never forget sitting with this gentleman here in this picture. His name is Sheikh Ehab, and he's a lecturer at Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, which is the third most holy site in all of Islam. And I was there guiding a delegation of Christian pastors to learn the work of peace by learning from peacemakers in that region. And as we sat with him, we were hearing just a remarkable man committed to the work of peace there. And I asked him very specifically, I said, hey, in the United States, we struggle with something. And you're a Muslim man. We struggle with Islamophobia. We're fearful of our other. We struggle to understand those who think or look or believe differently than we do. And I said, what's your suggestion to us as followers of Jesus, as Christian leaders, for a path forward? And I'll never forget when he looked at us and a bit somberly said, we need you to stop hearing about us and start hearing from us. And really what he was saying is we want to invite you around the table, rather than just presuming all of those bullet points and talking points we have about one another, whether it's Islam and Christianity, or whether it's this neighbor and this neighbor. We have to get close. We have to move from hearing about to hearing from, and in relationship. And I think that's one of the most profound invitations, and what ultimately I think what we see in Jesus in incarnation is a God who moved not to talk about us or about our conflicts, but to actually share a table with us. Let's see here. Is there anything I want to say before? I think we're going to pause right there, but I want to invite a question to this circle, if you're willing. I think in the midst of this polarizing season, the invitation for all of us to live as peacemakers is as important as ever. The language we've used is everyday peacemakers, not just peacemakers on an international level, but in every facet of our life. I'm thinking of with my wife and my kids and my neighbors, but also in my leadership spaces. What is it as you're coming to this, even as you saw the description, you decided to jump on this call in the midst of no doubt many other important things in your life? What are some tensions or maybe some conflicts you're experiencing within your world? I mean, I think specifically we'd say within the camping world, but it could be any, because I know not everyone may be specifically in that you're bringing into this workshop today. What are some of those questions you're asking, or a conflict that's on your mind, or a curiosity you bring around this table? And we can just popcorn in as you feel compelled.
I'm Daniel from Sierra Leone. I was thinking one of the questions I would like to ask is that what's the role of Christians um, um, in a confused world that we are living today, in a society that is a chaotic society? What's the role of us Christians in solving the problems of the world?
Thank you, Daniel. That's huge. What's the role of Christians in solving or participating in healing the conflicts in our world? Easy answer to that. We'll fix that in the next 40 minutes, no doubt. Others?
John, one of the prompts for inviting you today is that camp is such a unique environment where it, walls aren't just immediately erased, but they're definitely lowered when people enter into a camp space. And it's an opportunity that we don't want to miss. There's just something special about that temporary community where people can be a little more real. And so, my hope is that we can look at the uniqueness of the camp setting as opposed to a political environment or even a neighborhood church, and just say, what's unique about our setting that allows us to even just do something in that 1 week or that one weekend that begins to bridge the gap.
Yeah. And can I ask, Bill, would that be, do you imagine a lot of people come to a camp who maybe are from different demographics or different perspectives, and this kind of creates a de-escalated space to potentially hear from one another? Is that sorry.
Well, that certainly exists, and that's always my hope. But camp also runs the risk of sort of an echo chamber too, and there's a danger in that. And I think as camp leaders, when we have a focus on sort of a global unity, starting with the church, we need to be one in Christ. We got to start there to be attractive and real to the world around us. Some camps are diverse and some are not, and there's opportunity in all that.
Anyone else want to share before we proceed?
I'm Edward from Sierra Leone again. As I'm listening, the question that strikes my mind is regarding the internal conflict. Let's say if you have an internal conflict, that is conflict within yourself. Because if you are at peace with yourself, you can able to settle disputes among others. But when you are not at peace with your very self, it will be challenging and very difficult for you to settle disputes externally. So my question is how to handle internal conflict.
Thank you. That's good.
Welcome.
One of my favorite quotes is a paraphrase, is from someone named Thomas Merton. And he says, until we disarm the violence within ourselves, we won't disarm the violence in the world. Or you could say, until we disarm the conflicts within ourselves, we can't disarm the conflicts in our world. And he's talking specifically, Edward, to that point, that we have to do the work to disarm, like to heal within. Otherwise, we're just going to perpetuate the conflicts and the pain, because we're going to show up into those rooms with that pain. It's good. All right. Let's jump in here. I'm going to throw some content at you. Try to do it as brief as possible. And it would be wonderful to interact as we go, because what I'm going to do is lay out a pretty, hopefully, accessible theology for peace and peacemaking that gives us some language that we can work from, and then 4 core practices that you can begin to apply to your own context. If there's anything I've learned in this work of peacemaking training, I can't presume the answers to other people's questions. This has to be contextualized to your space. So be thinking of what is real for you in your relationships, maybe within yourself or those around you, or in your camps very specifically. And then we can interact from there. So starting point. I would argue that if we look at the biblical text, which my presumption is we all see that as a sacred organizing text for our life and faith, we have a text where God makes all things good. If we look at Genesis 1, Genesis 3, there's a break in the story. There's a fracture as humanity tries to grab for the fruit of power. And then really from that point on, God makes it God's mission to restore, to heal what was broken, deploying God's people and Sarah and Abraham, and then the story of the people of God moving from exile and restoration throughout the Old Testament story. And you hear from the prophets who are pleading with the people to remember their commitment with God to be good news to the world, to be peacemakers within the world, to contribute with God to heal what was broken earlier in their story. As the story goes, we see someone in the form of humanity begin to embody what it is, what this restoration looks like. In Jesus, we have a God who not only sees the humanity, the dignity, the image of God in each of us, but immerses, goes into and moves into our human neighborhood, ultimately to show us what peacemaking or contending for us looks like, in the form not of violent overthrow like many have expected, that many expected the Messiah, right, to come on the horse of the Roman Empire, or using the violence of the Roman Empire, but came as a child and ultimately gave his life for our flourishing rather than took it, which then leads to resurrection, to restoration. This is what the story looks like when things are put back together, and invites us to continue to contribute into that as the church. And so the theological starting point here, I would argue, of all the different definitions of mission of God I've read and studied and heard over the years, is that the mission of God is restoration. It's to heal what was broken. And peacemaking is the vocation of God's people. If God's mission is to restore what was broken, God has invited us to participate in that mission as everyday peacemakers who can contribute to that world that we trust that was made real in Jesus. There's lots of questions we could ask and then you hear, I guess I'll say, the Apostle Paul talks about the importance, Edward, of what you said, that as we are reconciled to God within ourselves, we are called to be reconcilers, or to be ambassadors of peace, ambassadors of reconciliation, as we read about in 2 Corinthians 5. And so, the questions we have to ask around the church on a global level is, have we lived this vocation? And if we have, what does that look like? And what can we learn from those who've gone before us? And if we haven't, why not? Why haven't we taken seriously our invitation to be people who are actually crossing every border and boundary that divides us from one another, whether it's theological or political or ideological or physical? We are people to be border crossers and moving towards one another as participants in God's mission of restoration. One of my mentors in this work, his name is John Paul Lederach, says he says that conflict is actually the most dynamic laboratory for genuine relationship. Why is that quote important? I think many of us, quite honestly, are terrified of conflict. We were raised in cultures and environments where if conflict comes up, we kind of sweep it under the rug, or if difference comes up, we see it as a problem. The opportunity of conflict is that it actually allows us to grow in actual dynamic, real relationships, if we have the tools to navigate it well. So the problem, I would argue, is not conflict, it's our ability to navigate it well. And we need tools that help us move towards it in a transformative way. John Paul Lederach would also say that conflict isn't just to be dealt with and resolved, it's to be transformed. If you think in your own life, if you've moved through a conflict with a spouse or a friend or someone else close to you, and you actually succeeded to get through the conflict, you're probably stronger than you were before the conflict, because you've built trust and rapport, and you've learned something about that person that you otherwise wouldn't have. An image for that is this Japanese art called kintsugi, and maybe some of you are already familiar with this. But this image has been so central to, I think, putting flesh and blood to this theology of peacemaking, but also to our life and relationships. The practices, an artist builds something beautiful like this bowl, and it actually culminates by breaking the bowl into pieces and putting it back together and sealing it with seams of gold. So what was once broken is actually stronger and more beautiful than it was before the break. And I think what this shows is when we move through conflict and have tools to mend those divides, we can actually experience a greater strength of relationship and be reminded of the beauty that comes when we follow God in this way of peacemaking. That peace, as I define it, is the holistic repair of relationship with God and myself, with my neighbor, and ultimately the created order. So that's some language for how to think about peace and even a visual. How do I define peacemaking? It's moving toward conflict with tools to heal and transform. So many of us are either terrified of conflict that we do nothing about it and we can become passive, which just perpetuates the status quo. And in many of our places, the status quo is not a good thing. It's not good news. And others of us have been taught you go and fight conflict, but you fight with the same tools of the world, if you will. Tools to win and to destroy. The way of Jesus invites us to move toward conflict as peacemakers with tools to heal and to transform. As we say yes to this, we then embrace our role as everyday peacemakers. What does it look like for me to be someone who's showing up to my life in our camps, in our organizations, in our relationships as people who aren't afraid of conflict, but actually feel equipped to move toward it, trusting that God is actually going to heal and bring about a stronger reality on the other side. For me, this has been I was raised in a culture that really saw conflict as a problem. And so it was like you could sweep stuff under the rug for weeks and months and years. What happens when we do that? We grow resentment. We grow distant from one another. But also other people are maybe part of family systems or church systems that when conflict comes, you just scream at each other and go to war. And it just becomes a place of trauma and pain. And so you avoid it. What might it look like for us to be those who are moving toward it to heal? There's 4 practices for those of us that want to say yes to this invitation to be peacemaker. I want to invite us into, and then for you to really be tangible. And what might it look like for you to live these practices in your context? And what might it even look like for these camps to create space for these practices to be embodied throughout, even if it's in a 1-week camp? How are we living these practices together? And then mobilizing communities to live this beyond our camps. The first practice, it sounds simple, it sounds even elementary, but I think it's quite remarkably profound and challenging, is to see the humanity and the dignity and the image of God in everyone. This is something, as we follow Jesus, we probably all agree that all are created in the image of God. Yet, it's so easy to miss that image in one another because we layer so many other things on top of one another. It interrupts our ability to actually see the humanity and the dignity and the image of God in others. This is what Jesus, we think of him walking up to the woman at the well, someone who was not seen in that society, someone who was othered, was out in the middle of the day, who had had multiple husbands, who was a woman in a very patriarchal environment, who was in Samaria, which is a community that was seen as impure among the Jewish community. Jesus not only sees her, he moves toward her. He actually takes the water that she offers and ingests it. He puts his life in the line in that way with from the other, or someone who would have been seen as an enemy. He sees the tax collectors who were in cahoots with the power brokers who were exploiting the people. He sees the humanity, the dignity, the image of God in them, even in the midst of their wrongdoing. Ultimately, we see in Jesus one who saw the humanity, the dignity, the image of God, even in his executioners, as he's being put to death, saying, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." This is a very costly and challenging invitation for us to see people in that way. And I think one of the ways that we can see this as I see this as largely a confessional practice, and ask the question, who have we been taught to see, and who have we been taught not to see? Who have we been taught to see? Oh, these are people that are in. These are okay. They check off the boxes of who is good or bad. But who have I been taught not to see? Who has maybe my culture or my region or my politics or my theology allowed me to distance? I've been taught not to see. I can notice them. I can keep them labeled as an enemy, but I don't actually see them. I don't see the humanity, the dignity, the image of God in them. For so long, in the context within which I was raised, there were large communities of people who worked in our fields. They were migrant laborers. And for almost 20 years, I drove between 5 spots: my church, the golf course, the beach, my school, and back home. And between every one of those stops were these fields stretched out as far as the eye could see, with people bent over picking the food I would have for dinner that night. And really, for a couple decades, I noticed them, but I didn't actually see them. I didn't see the humanity, the dignity, the image of God in them. I didn't understand their stories, their plights. And it really wasn't until I moved into my neighborhood here, where the vast majority of my neighbors are immigrant families. And now we're in school pickup lines together, and we're hearing the pains and the beauty and the brokenness within that community, that I began to wake up to, wow, there's entire populations that I have, just by where I grew up and kind of the theology I inherited, I was taught not to see. So now what's the invitation for me to actually see those people I've been taught not to see? Jean Vanier, a theologian, says we can create enemies because we haven't confronted the enemy within us. This goes back to our earlier point, that sometimes we need to see those parts of us that have kept us from seeing the way Jesus invites us to see. And when we recover our sight, we trust that Jesus, as the sight healer, can actually allow us to move towards new eyes, peel back the cataracts that are in our eyes that don't allow us to see people the way God sees them. So that's our first practice. That's our first practice of what we describe as everyday peacemaking. And what does that mean for you in your own life and in your context, organization or camp, to create a culture of seeing each other within and beyond and in the midst of our differences? The second practice is to immerse. Again, we're looking at the model of Jesus here as one who not only saw, but did not only saw our kind of humanity's conflicted story, but moved into it, moved toward it. God in Jesus moved into the human neighborhood and stepped into our reality. So we are people who step off the roads of comfort. Maybe this is the status quo, or what we've always known, and we move into what is real. And oftentimes when we move into what is real, we are surprised by what we see, because we have been taught not to see these things. A metaphor that I often go to here is immersion is often like, if you've been to a large body of water, whether it's a lake or an ocean or whatever, you can look out as far as the eye can see and you just see a big body of water. Sometimes it's blue or green or gray. But as soon as you immerse below the surface, you're awakened to a whole nother reality. The life, the color, all these different dynamics that exist and have always existed, but unless we immerse, we're not going to see them. So this is a practice of proximity, of moving toward. If I have someone I don't understand, what might it mean for me to move toward that person rather than to move away from them out of fear? If there's someone that I disagree with, what if rather than critiquing them for how I disagree with them, I ask a curious question and try to better understand where they're coming from? St. Francis said we need to seek to understand rather than to be understood. The immerse practice is actually moving towards relationships that might be difficult or hard and seeking to understand, rather than just thinking, how am I going to be understood? So practically, what does that look like in relationship? Someone might be saying something you disagree with, and the whole time they're talking, you're just thinking of your response, right? Like, how am I going to prove them right when they're done talking? No, as everyday peacemakers who immerse, we're actually entering in, trying to understand, to get curious, to listen longer than feels comfortable. In those moments, it's so hard to keep listening. What does it mean to even listen longer and create space to learn and understand those maybe on the other side of an issue or a reality than we are? I think in large part, this is some of the magic of camp, is immersion is proximity. We get close. And if there's anything I learned about the camp world, and even working with Bill way back when, it's you are close, you are proximate to a community for a short period of time, but almost like unlike any other. And when you are given the gift of proximity, that gap between us and them dissipates. It's just us. Another mentor guide, his name is Greg Boyle. He says, there's no us in them. There's just us. We can create these kind of boxes for each other, but in this space, and I'm even thinking of these 7 days at camp, it's just us. There's no us in them. So how are we going to function together? How are we going to learn together? Okay, the third practice, let's keep moving, is to contend. Everyday peacemakers stand in front of any bulldozer that's flattening people. They contend not by getting even, but getting creative in love. So as followers of Jesus who are saying yes to everyday peacemaking, we see the humanity, the dignity, the image of God in everyone. We move toward conflict equipped with tools to heal, to transform rather than to win. So we step off the road of comfort and into reality, and then we contend. This is the areas where we have to in costly ways fight for peace. Not in violent ways, but in costly ways. We fight for peace. It is not easy. Anyone that says that peacemaking is easy, it has not actually lived this peacemaking way. It's much easier to move away from the conflict or to say we have all the answers and just create more conflict. To actually be a peacemaker who's in it, to see, to immerse, then we are invited to actually contend, to roll up our sleeves. The ultimate example here is a Jesus who came not, again, with the tools of the Roman Empire, but with the tools of the kingdom of God. He contended for our flourishing, contended for our healing, contended for our restoration through suffering and selfless sacrifice. It was an act of giving away. It was a path of descent. But it was also remarkably courageous. It looked like in the Sermon on the Mount, turning the other cheek, walking the extra mile, giving away everything. To contend is a subversive, costly act that for Jesus' case cost him everything. What does it look like to be people who see and immerse, and in doing so, moving into that relationship, moving into that conflict, moving into that space, then saying, okay, what's it going to look like to actually show up in tangible ways to contend for restoration? There was a violent attack on a Jewish community here in the United States a number of years ago. It was at the Tree of Life Synagogue, and there was a movement across the United States to stand with this community who had been violated in such tangible ways. And I'll never forget, I'm part of an interfaith network here in San Diego of clergy, and we got an email from the local rabbi saying, it would mean so much to us if you stood with us in the midst of this pain. Our community is traumatized, and we need you with us. And so you had this mass mobilization of Jewish folks, of Christian folks, of Muslim folk, people of faith saying, we're going to show up together. We're going to contend for this community who's experienced this violence. And we're going to stand with them. And so this night, it looked like that family of mine you saw in the picture jumping in our minivan and putting on the clergy collar and driving to the synagogue, which was so packed that my wife is driving around the synagogue. I jump out. And by the time I got there, the fire code, like the city wouldn't allow any more people into the synagogue. And so the gates closed, and I'm outside with this growing community of people you can see in this picture. And this is a group of people that needs to process, to grieve, to lament. And one of them tapped me on the shoulder and said, you look like a clergy person. Would you guide us in a service out here? And so on the other side of this gate, me and some other folks, I asked some of the folks from the Jewish community, I'm like, this is your community. Can you share about the grief? What do you need from us right now? And so we had this lament. Contending in that moment looked like showing up on the streets of this synagogue to stand with the people and plead and pray to God like the prophets did in the Old Testament scriptures to heal what's broken. And to stand in the midst of the violence and say, we're with you here. We're not going anywhere. There's this idea of Ubuntu, which maybe some of you from the African continent are more familiar than others. This I am because we are. Like we are, my flourishing is connected to your flourishing. To be people who contend means we see each other. Our futures are dependent on one another. And that's a whole nother level. Rather than just seeing my future as the most important, I actually see our collective future. And for us with this community, we got to experience that. It was profound and such a gift. What's it going to look like to contend in your communities? Those that are hurting, suffering, experiencing injustice. Maybe a relationship that's broken beyond repair. What does it mean to contend for that relationship, for healing? Maybe it's an issue within the camping world with your staff or your teammates. How do we contend for each other so we can show up well for the campers that are entrusted to our community for this week? This can be like a weekly practice checking in with your team. How are we a team that's seeing and immersing and contending well as we show up for this community for the sake of God's restoration? The last practice, and then we can have some more conversation, hopefully, if this is provoking any questions or comments, is to restore. And we would say that to restore is less a practice and more a celebration of what God is doing in and among us. To restore is to share tables with former enemies and celebrate the big and small ways God is restoring our broken world. And this is when I think about the story, when I think of restoration, I think of the story of Peter with Jesus. You know, you have a Peter who was so adamant and outspoken in his commitment to Jesus. He's the one that wanted to grab the sword and fight back when and ears are getting cut off before Jesus is taken up to his crucifixion. But when it came down to it, as we know in John 18, Peter denies Jesus 3 times. When faced with the implications maybe of following Jesus and the cost of following Jesus, he denies him. And then you have Jesus, post-death and resurrection, come back to the table. In John 21, he's not content that the relationship is broken with Peter. And he comes to the shores of Galilee and he sets a table. You could picture him lighting a fire, setting a table to have breakfast with his old pal. And he sits there with Peter and he asks him, "Do you love me?" And Peter says, "Yeah." "But do you love me?" "Yeah, Jesus, I love you." And a third time asking, "Do you love me?" And Peter says, "Yes, I love you." And this is a reflection of a God who cares so much about our restoration that he'll circle back on the other side of resurrection to restore what was broken with Peter, to undo the 3 denials with 3 yeses, with 3 restorations. I would argue that when there's still peacemaking to be done, Jesus simply set a table. And at the table for us, whatever context we're in around the world, what if the table is the most important piece of furniture in the kingdom of God? We're creating tables for us to sit among our differences and with our similarities, our shared convictions and our separate convictions, and saying it is here that we can show up with one another. It is here that we trust restoration can happen as we see, immerse, and contend. So that brings us back to this image of kintsugi. As everyday peacemakers, how are we contributing and participating with this vision of healing? We know that the world is fractured. We know that there's relationships that are broken. We know that the task is heavy and high to say yes to this way. But what's it look like for us to be menders of these divides, to actually put these broken pieces together and trust that as we have tools to heal, we can actually see it sealed with seams of gold, reminding us of God's work to strengthen, to restore. What was once broken is actually more beautiful and stronger than it was before the break. I think this is a very compelling invitation for all of us. And also one that I have to note is costly. This is a counter-cultural way of life. I can't speak for all cultures, but certainly the cultures that I have been raised in, the culture is not necessarily to seek to heal and to restore, but usually to get even or to turn a blind eye and walk away. And so one of the questions we have to ask, and I think this is a gift of the community like this, is how do we support each other on this journey? In a culture that's saying we have to create us versus them spheres, how are we walking this path together towards God's restoration, seeing in each other a community who's walking the way? And when one of us is struggling, we walk with them, we pick them up, we encourage. Because again, it is a countercultural way for most of us in our context. Okay, what's coming up for, what are you all hearing here? Maybe any questions? Bill or Vicky, feel free to jump in too with ways that could land this within your context of the camping world and make it as tangible as possible.
I certainly have thoughts, but I'd love to hear from someone in this group or a few of you. Please weigh in. That was really, really good content, Jon. Thank you.
John Ross here from New Zealand. How does it work with peacemaking when it takes us into areas that we know are against God's will? There are many, many places that things are happening and we know that peace needs to be made, but what's happening there is very contrary to God's will. How do we navigate that track? Thank you.
Thanks, Ross. It's a great question. And I will certainly not presume I know the answer to it, but I think one of the invitations we have as people who are sent as peacemakers is, I think the beauty of our faith and our deep convictions is it frees us up to move into places that maybe feel contrary to God's will and not feel like we're threatened, like to say that God is actually bigger than any of these issues. And maybe I'm actually the person to be embedded within this area, that I don't have a fragile faith, but a courageous and strong faith that allows me to move in and among these relationships. You know, some of the most compelling peacemakers, I feel like, are those who move in spaces where they're up against some of the most resistance and hold their convictions about who they are and whose they are as followers of Jesus. And I'm not, so again, Ross, I'm not projecting that on your situation because I don't know the nuances there. But I do wonder, just from a big picture level, for those of us that say yes to Jesus and following this way, I think we have to be embedded in some of these spots. And I think Jesus gives us that example so often throughout the Gospels. But also, I guess one more thing, to be in community is so important. If and when you're moving into those spaces, who's walking with you? We are not designed to walk alone, and to walk with others into that space with intentionality and courage and support, I think is a really critical piece.
Sam, I just noticed that you were in the call. It's good to see you, friend.
Good to see you. I can take the time just to say, I don't have like a big question or anything, but I have to say that it's a beautiful reminder to our call of not being blind in the conflicts around us, but also to step up and to take a place in the solution of the conflicts when it's in our hands. There are so many conflicts. This is a world full of conflicts, and it's so complicated to be involved in everything, trying to solve everything. But I know it's a big call to us as Christians to step up and just to take participation in the solution. And it's beautiful what you are sharing, because we are full of information telling us like how to be the way of solving conflicts in the, like the world is doing it is like, I'm better than you and you have to be down, or you have to be humiliated so that I can rise, and you have to accept that I'm better than you, or something like that. And seeing the way that Jesus did it, it was it's such a a different way and a beautiful way to see it, and being able to recognize that you're stronger when you are not trying to humiliate other people, but like trying to make them raise or and set up peace, and you start enjoying these when you change the way you think, in the concepts that the world is teaching you, like in Hollywood or in the movies or TV series, they're teaching you how to solve in different ways, like killing people, or that's what sells the movies. But reality is that's not gonna solve anything. So
Yeah.
it's beautiful to hear this information and just to have a reminder that the Bible and that God is calling us to do something different.
Mm,
Thank you. It's
Sam.
a pleasure to share this time with you.
Awesome.
And you.
In the comments mentioned that she'd love to hear Vladimir's thoughts as he leads the teams in Ukraine, where camps are being very effective right now in the midst of war. And I don't know, Vladimir, if you're still with us, if you
Yeah,
will.
I'm with you. Just I cannot use video. In general, I think uh, theologically, I've just taught a course on the first epistle of John, and chapters 3 and 4 talk a lot about love, and basically saying, let's say John 4:21, you must love your brothers and sisters. Like, not you may choose to love or not, but you must love. So if you call yourself a Christian, if you walk in the light, you must love your brothers and sisters. And I think that's another side of reconciliation. And again, in particular, if we take love as covenant loyalty and not as what we understand it in today's everyday life. So that's kind of one of the things like to add and a facet to that.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Vladimir. And much love to you in your space there.
Thank you.
It's one thing to talk about this. Hopefully, we're not just talking about it on a theoretical level, but some of us have the luxury of talking about it on a theoretical level, and other of us don't, and really want to honor and acknowledge that those that are tangibly having to choose this way. It's a holy path. So,
But you know, John, just one more thought. It's very valuable in what you said about talking to people, like when we're giving that example about the Muslim person, talking to people versus hearing and accepting what is being said about those people. So I think that's a really, really, really valuable thing. Talk directly to the people and then make your decisions about them.
It's good.
Yeah.
John, thank you. I'm so grateful. I want to honor everyone's time because we've been in the call for an hour, and that's what we like to keep it to. Most importantly is that we have this community and we keep pouring into it by fellowship, being together, sharing with each other, and tackling challenging and exciting subjects, whatever they may be. In this case, I think it's both. I completely agree with you, John, that this is God's work. This is what he's called us to do. And I see not only the Christian church, the big C there, or the local church, and or camps or any parachurch ministry for that matter, and in our wanting to introduce people to Jesus, what we're trying to do is bring them to a place where they're joining their Creator in his restoration work. Yes, we have hopes for eternity and heaven and the likes, but the kingdom is here now and not fully complete. So we have a work to be done, and our love for each other just speaks volumes to this divided world. And as the population grows and people tend to just continue to sort of spin out, they're looking for hope and purpose and meaning, and what they really want is an authentic, loving community where they're seen just as you said it. And I loved how you framed it, that not only did Jesus see these people, he immediately like walked towards them and interacted with them. And that is very countercultural. In fact, I think we way underestimate the risks that he took in all those situations. I think we look at our situation going, oh, to walk into a Muslim situation, or to walk into a non-believing situation, or to do this, you just don't understand the risks, societally and relationally, interpersonally, politically. And it's like, just measure those up if you really study what Jesus put on the line every time he did that. And love triumphs. And I just think of camp and the powerful method it is, and the tool that God has created for that temporary community. When we lean into peacemaking in those contexts, for all ages, but especially the young ones, we're unleashing and launching a whole group of young minds and hearts into the world that just see things differently, more the way Jesus does, and that freshness. And I remember years ago, a speaker at a camping convention just said he doesn't know of a more effective space to do peacemaking than Christian camps. His specific context was Protestant and Catholic fighting in Ireland. And he's like, these kids love each other, they play together, and then they go home and their parents are confronted with this reality that their kids made genuine friendships and were loved by the other. And it just started to melt down barriers just like that. Camp, there was all these efforts by other organizations, but it was just in the beauty and simplicity of camp that walls were knocked down and cold hearts were warmed up. So I just want to thank you, Jon, for leading us in this discussion. I want to thank you for your work that God's called you to. There are people in this call and others who will watch it later who are doing very similar work. And to know that, like, as you said, we're not alone. We're not intended to be alone. I'm just so encouraged that we're having this conversation, and you're guiding us not just from book work, but from the front lines. Thank you for your ministry.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it.
And on that note, I just want everyone to know that this could be available to you on YouTube later. Vicky will send out links, and please share it with those in your networks. And let's keep the conversation going. And better yet, not just talk about it, but do these 4 things that Jon has mentioned to us today. If we're not doing them already, it's easy to get started. It's a difficult task overall, but it's worth it. It's what we're called to, and there's easy entry points to see, to immerse, to contend, and to restore. So on that note, I'm going to pray for us and end our time, but not the conversation. And Jon, is it okay if we share some contact info in case people have questions after the fact?
You bet. Please do.
Okay, we'll do that. Let's pray. But Father, we thank you that we could come together at this time and to be reminded and encouraged in our calling, in your work in this world. It isn't just for us. We talk about a message that is so much centered around us all the time, and you care deeply for us, and you want to rescue our hearts and see us with you for eternity. But it's an us conversation, Lord. Your work is always about all, and for us to see them, image bearers of you, Lord. Even in the example that Jesus gave us in how to pray to you, Lord, it's to forgive us and lead us. It's always about this larger community, your creation. So, Lord, this is tough work. It's beautiful work. It's right. As a friend said, the kingdom of God is the kingdom of right relationships. So, Lord, let us lean into that and show us not only your way, but show up and show us how you're at work to encourage our hearts to keep going. We thank you for camp ministry and the power of that, and that may it just turn out peacemakers by the tens of thousands every year and launch them into this world, blessing this planet towards full restoration. We give this all to you in the powerful name of Jesus our Lord. Amen. Thank you everyone for joining in. Vicky and I will hang out for a while, but if you've got to go right now, take care, and otherwise we'll see you on the next call. All right. Goodbye.